If you're like me, maybe you've experienced disillusionment before. Disillusionment is really simple. It's a deep disappointment in a person or a thing in which you had once held a pretty high belief in, and all of a sudden something happens that causes you to question your belief in that thing. It could be a parent. It could be a teacher, a coach. It could be a political party. It could be any number of things. Over the next few weeks, we're going to talk about what happens when we face disillusionment with life, with God, and with the church. And so we're going to have some open dialogue, open conversations about the realities of that, and then also share stories of hope. We want to we want you to feel encouraged when you leave here, because if you are disillusioned, we don't want you to leave here. We want you to be on a path towards growing, towards understanding that these things do happen, but it doesn't have to stay that way for you. It doesn't have to stay that way. And since this is Father's Day, I thought I'll be sharing Father's Day elements in this message, but things you will never hear your dad say. Things you'll never hear your dad say. You want to borrow my credit card? I never heard my dad say that. How come you haven't got any tattoos or body piercings yet? I was 19 years old. I came home for a weekend with my freshly pierced ears. And my dad, who was a great dad, a great man, but not a perfect man by any means, he looked at me, and the only thing that came out of his mouth was, "I hope they get infected." And a month later, I had them out because they surely did get infected. I couldn't keep those stinking things to not hurt, and so it didn't. Earrings just weren't in my future. But things you'll never hear Dad say: "Ew, sports. Could you please turn that music up?" I've never heard your dad say that. And the most true one of all: "I'm lost. I have no idea where I'm going." You never hear dads say that. When it comes to the scriptures, God's word, where we see God speaking to his people, things you'll never hear our Heavenly Father say: "You need to first earn my acceptance." Careful now, you only get one chance. You won't find that in here. You won't hear God say, "I'm too busy right now." We don't hear God saying, "Why can't you be like everybody else?" How many are grateful for that? And most of all, what's that? I didn't hear you. And today we're talking about what happens when we become disillusioned with prayer. This week, whenever Pastor Michael is on vacation, I take his responsibility of changing the sign on the street. And I had a little bit of difficulty this week doing it, and for two reasons. One, can I just be open and honest here, transparent? I struggle with the spelling of the word disillusioned, okay? I'm just going to tell you that, all right? There's another word that no matter how old I am, no matter how many times I've written it or typed it, the word definitely, I struggle with that word. There's always that one word that you're just like, why can't I get this right? And so I was out there changing the sign, but I was also battling a couple beehives that have lodged inside the sign, right? And so I'm fighting off these stupid bees, and I'm trying to do this sign as quickly as I can, and it was hot, and I was sweating, and sure enough, I spelled disillusioned wrong on the one side because I was in a rush, right? And I get a call later on that afternoon. Someone had driven by. Someone was nice enough to drive by and notice the misspelling and call the church. That never happens, right? And so I went back early the next morning and fixed it. But as I'm putting those words up there, disillusioned with prayer, I'm praying, God, please, as someone is driving by, if they see this sign and that resonates with them, I hope it'll be enough to get them to stop in and hear that it doesn't have to stay that way. It doesn't have to stay that way. And if you remember anything from this message today, I hope it is this from Psalm 33, where the psalmist says in verse 4, "For the word of the Lord is right and true. He is faithful in all he does. For the word of the Lord is right and true. He is faithful in all he does. That verse right there is sort of the foundation for this message. Because I have found that verse through the peaks and the valleys in my faith to be absolutely true. That he is a good, good father, as TJ just led us in that song, who is faithful in all he does. My story of delusionment with prayer goes back about 13 years, where my dad was becoming very, very ill. He had become very, very sick with cancer. I mean, it attacked his body and was quickly taking him. And my pastor, he had been on the board of this church, and we'd been in this church for a long time. My pastor, I was an associate pastor here, I was a youth pastor at the time, called a special prayer service, right? You may have been at our prayer service that we had a couple weeks ago on a Saturday evening, which the sanctuary was full with people. We had our Brazilian congregation, our Spanish church, and Native American congregation there, and worshiping and praying, and we're laying hands on people, praying for their healing, whether it be physical needs, emotional needs, their family needs, right? We're praying and calling on God for healing. And as I stood there watching and participating in that service, I remembered this particular healing service from when my dad was sick. And it was held in this chapel. They have a beautiful chapel to the side of the sanctuary. And after the service, he'd gathered about, 40, 50 people. These were like what they call the pillars of the church, right? These were men and women of great faith. They're the kind of people that you grow up listening to praying, and you watch them and you think, if God's going to hear anybody, it's going to be those people, right? Because those guys they know what they're talking about when it comes to prayer. And they gathered around and they prayed for my dad. I remember just kind of being in the background because it was, even though I was a pastor and stuff, I just wanted to kind of be part of it because this was my dad, right? And about 3 months later, he passed. Those prayers for healing weren't answered in the way that we all had hoped. And it was the first real time of disillusionment that I had experienced with prayer and God. I'd been disappointed with people before and things like that in the church, definitely, right? But not with God. Did it stop me from being a pastor? No. I continued to be a pastor. Did it even stop me from believing in prayer? No. I continued to pray. But what it did is it caused me to be disillusioned with prayer for healing in a way that as a pastor, I avoided people who would come to me and ask me to pray for them for healing. And it wasn't because I didn't like them. It wasn't because of any other reason other than I knew deep down inside, I knew that I would not be able to pray with the kind of faith needed for their healing. I knew that I would not be the right person in that time because it affected me. It had changed something in me. I had a hard time understanding and believing that God would heal. How could you not respond to a chapel full of spiritual giants like that? Right? Over time, I matured. I learned from it. It's been 13 years. And on Father's Day, I see my kids, and they all run into church today. It was the first time I'd seen them because I left the house early, and they all say Happy Father's Day, except for my eldest, because he's really cool now. He's in the youth group, and he was like, "Hey, Dad." And I was like, "All right, I'll take it, right?" We made eye contact. I'll take it. But I'm getting hugs, But there's also this side of me that misses my dad, right? Every Father's Day. Some of you know exactly what I'm talking about right now. But I grew and I matured. And I could be in that healing service that we had 2 or 3 weeks ago, and I could pray fervently. I could pray with faith and belief that God is going to heal some people, right? It took time, but God has restored that faith. You see, people everywhere, in our community right now. They're driving past churches. They're sitting in churches. You may be one of them right now, and you know exactly what I'm talking about. When I talk about disappointment with God, when I talk about disillusionment with prayer, it strikes a chord with you. You understand. You get it, right? You may be wondering, why, God, is it taking so long for you to answer this prayer? Why? You may be at just the end of your rope with your faith. Many people, your neighbors, your coworkers, some of your family have given up altogether because the disappointment was just too great. And so what I would like to do today is just try and help us in an encouraging way understand how to overcome those times when we become disillusioned. How do we overcome those? How did I grow from being completely unfaithful in my prayers for other people's healing to now being able to have some faith when people pray? I don't avoid people anymore at church when they want prayer for healing, right? Like I used to. It's amazing how many times I I need to go to the bathroom. I better go. All right, you're just avoiding it altogether, right? And I thought this week as I was preparing this message, I thought about one of my favorite Old Testament people, and that is the person of Nehemiah, the story of Nehemiah. If you're new to the scriptures, in the Old Testament, there is this book called Nehemiah. It's his life story, basically. It's a short book, and it's one of my favorites. Nehemiah was a very passionate individual who cared deeply for his city. It's one of the things I love most and respect most about the story of Nehemiah. He loved his city. And word had traveled to him that the walls of his city had been destroyed, broken down. And in this time, thousands of years ago, walls were very symbolic around a city. Walls symbolized strength, protection, vitality, right? It symbolized just a strong, vibrant, growing city. And when those walls would come down, the reputation of that city would come down with it, right? And so he is burdened, he is weeping, crying over the destruction of the walls of his city. And he has this dream. He has the courage, the audacity to think that I can gather enough people, I will rebuild the walls of my city myself. But he has to get the king's permission first. He has a big ask for God, right? How many of you have ever, about to walk into your boss's office and ask for a raise or ask for that promotion, right? You've ever walked into a big job interview, right? It's something, and you've got a big ask. God, help me, right? Give me favor with this person. I'm about to go ask for a big raise. I remember the very first time I ever asked for a raise, I was terrified, right? And I walked out and I was like, that wasn't so bad, right? But here he is. He's about to face the king with a big ask. And he comes to God first. And we learn something about humility in prayer from Nehemiah. You see, he was a strong man, a leader, yet very humble. And he says this in Nehemiah 1, verse 11. "O Lord, please hear my prayer." How simple. God, please hear my prayer. It's like a kid coming to a parent. Say, can I please have this? Right? Just the humility. He doesn't start, this is what I want to do, God. So I have an idea, God. No, he starts off, God, please hear my prayer. And he says, listen to the prayers of those of us who delight in honoring you. The humility, he knows his place. He knows that God is the authority, right? And he recognizes that there are people like him who want to honor God. And he says that they delight in honoring him. They find joy in honoring God, in elevating God, in putting God above themselves, right? And he says, please grant me success today by making the king favorable to me. Put it in his heart to be kind to me. He's walking into that big meeting. He's about to ask for the impossible. He needs permission, all right? Everything is stacked against him. And he just says, God, please hear my prayer. Sometimes the greatest prayers are as simple as that. Because when it comes from humility, right, the good Father responds. The good Father responds. If we come to God and say, okay, you said no to my last 5 prayers, so you kind of owe me on this one, buddy. Not humble, not very honoring of God. But I've been there before. All right? Okay, you didn't answer the prayer for my dad? All right, well, you owe me on this one because I'm praying for my friend now, or right? You owe me. One of the hardest things, I'll never forget this in understanding like the depths of disillusionment at times with prayer, is I was the pastor on call at my church. It was a large church, several thousand people, and we had a rotation of pastors on call where we had to do hospital visitation, and we had this cell phone that was by our bed at night for people to call and pray with them. Well, I got a call to go visit someone in the hospital, same hospital where a month before my dad had passed away, and I take the elevator up. I'm like, same floor. Come out in the elevator, walk in, look at the nurse's board, same room. One of the hardest prayers I've ever had to pray was for that person in that room, right? If we come to God with like, hey, you owe me this one, God. If your kids come to you and say, you owe me this one, Dad, we don't respond, right, with much favor in that way. But when we come to God, God, can you just hear me? Just listen to me. Just listen to me. I'm asking here for favor. Approaching God with humility helps us overcome disillusionment in prayer. But so does approaching God with confidence. With confidence. Not arrogance, not ego, but confidence. There's this story in the Gospel of Matthew where a dad has a son, and his son has become demon-possessed, right? And he brings his son. He's desperate for his son to be delivered, to be healed. Of course, any dad would be. And he takes his son to the disciples. And he asks the disciples to pray for his son and that they would, deliver him from this demon possession. And so they do it, but it doesn't work. The kid is still demon possessed. He's not healed, right? So what the father does is next best thing, I'll take him straight to Jesus. And he says to Jesus, he says, so I took him to the disciples, but they couldn't help, so maybe you can help. And Jesus, there are times in the Gospels where Jesus has very harsh words, where it takes a little bit to figure out what in the world is his motive here. Why is he responding this way? And his response to this father with his son is kind of harsh. He's like, you faithless, perverse generation. Like, what? He's just coming for help. And you call him faithless and perverse? What's that all about? Right? And later on, it says that the disciples came to Jesus and they asked questions. I'm sure they did this many, many times behind the scenes, asking like, what was this about? What did you mean by that? Right? And they said, why didn't it work? We prayed for him. We did everything that you've taught us. We even prayed the words that you've prayed. Why didn't it work? And Jesus has some, again, strong words. And he says to them, you don't have enough faith. You don't have enough faith. Jesus told them, I tell you the truth. And if you're new to the scriptures, friends, if you're reading the Gospels and you see Jesus say, very, verily I say unto you, or I tell you the truth, that's a stop and underline moment right there. Stop and reread it and reread it and read it, because this is God's way of getting our attention. This is about to be something important. He says, I tell you the truth. If you had faith even as small as a mustard seed, if you've seen a mustard seed before, super, super tiny, okay? You could say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it would move. Nothing would be impossible. So Jesus goes from this chin-dropping statement of, you don't have enough faith, right? And the guy's, oh man, he's right. I'm such a loser. I don't have enough faith. to giving them this promise that if you have faith even as small as a mustard seed, you can tell that mountain to move from there to there, because nothing will be impossible. And all of a sudden it becomes this jaw-dropping moment for the disciples. Wow. Faith, even the smallest amount, is the one ingredient needed in prayer. You can pray eloquently. God says, good for you. But without faith behind it, it's just fancy words. You can pray the scriptures, great. So can a lot of people. If faith isn't behind it, trust, it's just Bible memorization. Faith, this confidence that when we approach God, he hears us. It's faith that understands, I may not get the answer my heart desires, but I have faith in a God that knows me, that created me, that has great purpose and plans for me. Thus, I will believe with faith that the answer he gives me is the right answer. As many of you know, and I promise, the baseball stories will end one day, okay? I promise you. But I coached Little League, the season's over, and I couldn't help, as I'm preparing this message, thinking about a young man named Connor, who was on my team. Connor is 10, and he was a bit of a great kid, very, very coachable, but a bit of a project kid. It was only his second year ever of playing baseball. It took a lot of time after practices working with him one-on-one on certain things, right? Just understanding the game. But this kid was eager to learn. And our first game, he got hit by a pitch, okay? Right in the side, right in the ribs. You could hear it, the thud, right? And he seemed to be okay. Next game, or maybe it was the third game, he gets plunked in the helmet, the head, right? Just right in the head, okay? He didn't even move. I was kind of like, Connor, you got to help yourself out here, buddy, and duck or something, right? You got to move. He was just frozen there, and the pitches hit him in the helmet. Now he's scared. Now he's understandably terrified of having a ball pitched to him. And we spent the majority of the rest of the season through the playoffs working on developing not his swing, not his feet, but confidence. Everything up here. And it was to the point where he would face the pitcher, right? Pitcher's out here. You'd face the pitcher, and he's in his stance. And before the pitcher would even release the ball, he was doing this, running away. I mean, terrified. And so when we'd have batting practice in the batting cages, right, I would have my other coaches throwing to the rest of the team, and it was just Connor and me many times in the other cage, just he and I, right? And I would say, okay, this is what you're going to do. You're not going to like this much, but I want you to start out there. And he'd say, what do you mean out there? Like out there. I don't want you in the batting cage. I want you out there. I want the bat in hand, helmet on, and when I say ready, you walk in and you just walk up to the plate and be ready to hit. And we would do that over and over, and I would pitch to him, and every single time he'd back away, and I'd say, okay, go. He'd make him go out of the cage, go stand 20 feet away, and walk in, because I was trying to teach him the mentality of walking from a dugout in a game to the plate. Because so much of good hitting is about confidence, the mental approach. With prayer, when we learn to pray confidently, there's this process of saying, okay, I'm going to come to God now in prayer. And whether that's finding yourself on your knees, whether that's finding yourself turning the radio off in your car and just settling in on your long commute, there's this process of coming to God in our heads and our hearts. And how we approach God, is it with confidence? Or is it with, right, this sense of, it's not going to work this time, what's the point? Right? God wants us to approach him with confidence, not with ego, not with arrogance, but with confidence that he's done enough for us in our past to earn our trust, that he hears us. In my life, I've been able to overcome the disillusionment with prayer for healing, and I can pray with confidence now because it's been that practice of over and over coming to God, coming to God. So does God hear us? Is he hearing your prayers? Yes. Does he answer every prayer exactly the way that we want? No. But does God ultimately, in his plans, does his answer, is it worthy of our continued faith and our continued confidence in continuing to come to a good Father as Nehemiah did? Would you please hear my prayer? Please hear my prayer. As you get ready to go home in a little while, I would like you to just continue to contemplate on Psalm 33:4. He is faithful in all he does. He is faithful in all he does. And my challenge for you this week would be this. It's simple. Look for God's faithfulness in all of your prayers. Those that have been answered yes, those that have been answered no, and those that seem to be on hold. Those prayers that you continue to every single day come to him with the same prayer, and you're just wondering and waiting and waiting and waiting. You can find God's faithfulness in those too. Look for God's faithfulness in all your prayers this week. Are you disillusioned with prayer today? Are you disappointed with God in some way today? Does your idea of prayer seem to raise more questions than certainties? If you answered yes to any of those, I've got good news for you. You're in good company because you're surrounded by people who would probably say at some point in their journey of faith have been as well. And yet here we are. We're still here. We're still praying. We're still asking God to move because he's a good Father. TJ's going to come and sing this song, and Linda talked about these Father's Day cards here. I have mine that I've written to my dad, and as TJ's singing the song before I close in prayer, while he's singing, if you have your card, we're just asking. It's a way of honoring our dads. It's also sort of like an act of solidarity a little bit too. If your dad has moved on, or I don't know, maybe, you know what, maybe this card symbolizes sort of a letting go. Because maybe Father's Day just is kind of a rotten day. I don't know. Maybe it's a letting go. While he's singing, before I pray, if you want to come and just lay it here at the stage, just put it here on the stage, and then I'll close our time in prayer.
You're good, good Father. It's who you are. It's who you are. It's who you are. And I'm loved by you. It's who I am. It's who I am. It's who I am. I've seen many searching for answers far and wide, but I know we're all searching for answers. Only you provide because you know just what we need before we say a word. You're a good, good Father. It's who you are. It's who you are. It's who you are. And I'm loved by you. It's who I am. It's who I am. It's who I am.
God, we thank you for this day. Thank you for our dads. Thank you for the opportunity to be a dad today. God, thank you most of all as we talk about prayer, that even in our times where we become disappointed, disillusioned with the idea of prayer, where prayer raises more questions in our life than it does certainties, that God, you still are there. You hear us. For you promise in your word that you will never leave us. You will never walk away from us. You've never once said, I'm too busy. You've never once said, I can't hear you. But yet some of us today, we're holding on by a thread because we've been praying and praying and praying, and we're waiting, and we're tired of waiting. I ask, God, that you would reveal to us, even while we wait, just how faithful you've been. Help us to see your faithfulness in all of our prayers, the yeses, the nos, and the waiting. And God, I pray that we would just continue to grow and mature in our faith in a way that we can say, yes, I was once delusioned, but I've found new hope. My faith has been renewed because God heard my prayer. Help us to go today in grace and peace and love our city the way Nehemiah did, to love others, Jesus, the way you have loved us. In your name I pray, amen.